Life is a journey, but what happens when we die? Is it the end, or is it just the beginning? As an atheist, Howard Storm was convinced that death marked the end of consciousness. But then he died and went to hell.
Eternal life with God the Father, Jesus and Mary, the angels, the saints, and our loved ones. It is the heavenly existence most God-fearing people hope to experience, and which some have even claimed to have seen. Eternal damnation in the fiery pit of hell is a concept no one likes to consider. Yet it is a poignantly real nightmare for countless lost souls, those who die in a state of mortal sin, and self-absorbed individuals whose lives here on earth had one common denominator, the complete rejection of God and the denial of his existence. While on earth, they tossed God into the swirling sea of reasoning, a cesspool of ideologies and philosophies that claim man is master of his own fate, that powerful careers and making lots of money are the true measures of success, the formulas for happiness and fulfillment, and that in the end, all that is left, all that really matters, is our portfolio of personal accomplishments, the monuments to our ego. But after death, those human monuments come crashing down. Without God, there is only darkness and the frightening realization that hell truly exists. In the words of Protestant minister Howard Storm, it is the sewer of the universe, a foreboding place where lost souls feed off the pain of others. Storm knows this firsthand. In 1985, this self-proclaimed atheist died, and to his horror found that he had been banished to hell.
Howard, thanks for being with us. We really appreciate this.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to begin with just the issue of who you were in 1985, because by all measurements, you were an average art professor, probably a very good artist.
Thank you.
I've seen your work, so I know that you're a good artist, but you were just the average person out there. You had not, as far as we know, committed any heinous crime of any sort.
Right.
And yet, when you die, you're sent to hell. And that could have been anybody out there who was leading a good life. Why? What were you? Who were you?
Well, unfortunately, I say that from my perspective now, we are all sold a bill of goods in this society that, like, being good is good enough. And what we mean by being good is if you don't kick the dog and, you know, aren't too nasty to your wife and kids and pay your taxes and don't break the laws in any conspicuous way, that's good. And being self-centered and manipulative and me first always kind of attitude is encouraged in our society. So I look upon myself then as living the American dream, and I think many people would say I was you know, on the right track. But that's not why we're in this world, and not why we were created, and not what is expected of us to do with our lives. And that's what I learned.
You were self-centered, but you were also so self-centered that you didn't think there was any other force out there that would determine your future, like God. You did not believe in God?
Now, sometime when I went to college, I was 17 years old, I just gave up on the whole God thing, and you know, my philosophy professor ridiculed it all as like Sleeping Beauty and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and stuff like that. And these are, basically the idea was religion was the opiate of the masses. It was like for addled brain people that couldn't deal with the harsh reality of existence. And I thought I was way beyond religion into a existential, very materialistic, you know, very hedonistic kind of life, which I think, from my perception, is the prevailing culture of our society.
And you were building your own human legacy, which you thought would help see your name live on forever and ever, long after you were gone to nowhere.
Right.
What were you doing? You were creating works of art?
Well, I was doing painting and sculpture, and I was having my own small success. I was named Sculptor of the Year in the state of Kentucky. That was a biggie for me and stuff like that. You know, sell some work once in a while, win a prize, and you know, there was always that next level you were trying to get to. You know, as soon as you made one level of success, it was like you set your eyes on the next one, always striving, always working to prove, basically, that you were of worth, that you were of value to the world.
But you had some struggles during those times, obviously. Who did you turn to? What did you turn to? I know you had some sort of religion instilled in you when you were younger. You didn't turn back to that at all? You never felt like you should? There was never that gnawing feeling?
No, because as an academic, we all ridiculed those things. So when I'm not proud of this, but who I turned to was alcohol, you know, going out, staying out all night with my friends and going to hip, artsy bars in Cincinnati and being really cool and listening to jazz music and getting intoxicated to the point where you're worried about whether you could make it home or not. I mean, that was my religion. And it's also an anesthetic, because inside of me there was a great emptiness, a great darkness that I couldn't fill with anything.
And you felt that? You felt that void?
And unfortunately there were times when I really thought about killing myself, because it was like, is the pain of being alive, and I'm not talking about an acute pain. This is like the pain is more like a numbness. It's hard to explain. The angst of being alive, is it worth it? You know, wouldn't it be better just to drive the car into a, you know, bridge abutment and put an end to it?
And so in 1985, how old were you? About
38.
38 years old. You're in Paris with your wife on an art convention of sorts.
Right, art tour with a bunch of students.
Right.
I had at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, I had a whole break in my small stomach, which is the duodenum, and I may have had a ulcerous condition that I was unaware of, or it might have been from a foreign object, like a small shard of glass or something. I don't know, but I was taken to the big city emergency room.
Well, wait a minute. You collapsed on the floor, though, in this.
Oh, yeah.
You're writhing in pain. You're writhing in pain.
It, without any exaggeration, it was like being on fire inside.
Like rats were eating you up inside. Yeah, there was an acid release that was
yeah,
literally eating your inside?
The things that dissolve your food, the hydrochloric acid and the enzymes and things, were leaking into my abdominal cavity, literally digesting myself on the inside. So it's kind of eating myself up. And it was the most acute pain I'd ever experienced.
And they called an ambulance, and a doctor comes with, diagnoses.
Oh, yeah, they knew exactly what was wrong. Sent me off this wild ambulance ride through Paris.
With a shot of morphine, only one shot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as he explained, it was only enough to get me to the hospital, because he said, you're going to have surgery as soon as you get there, and I can't give you any more because it'll interfere with the anesthetic that they're going to administer when you have the surgery. And our understanding then, and in emergency, was this is an extremely grave situation, like having a burst appendix. But if you get right on it and do surgery, 4 weeks, 6 weeks later, you're pretty good shape. 8 to 12 weeks later, and you're good as new, no problem. If you let it go, it's fatal, you know, because of the damage that it does to your insides, which is the infection of peritonitis and the digestive juices messing up your organs. So I was sent from the emergency hospital over to a surgical hospital several blocks away. And unbeknownst to my wife and I, there was no surgeon available at the surgical hospital to do the surgery. So they parked me in a room and left me there for 10 hours. And the doctors in the United States told me that my life expectancy from the beginning of this incident was about 5 hours. So I was in really bad shape.
Yeah, they kept coming in and telling you that it would be soon, and then eventually they said the only doctor there had gone home.
Yeah.
And they couldn't give you any more morphine or any pain reliever because a doctor
I was never given any further
had
medication because only the doctor could prescribe medicine. I was never seen by a doctor from the time I went into that surgical hospital.
So they come in and they say, look, the doctor's gone home, you can't have the surgery today.
Right. This is about 8:30 at night now.
And they leave, the person leaves, and...
Yeah, and I turned to my wife, my wife tells me this was the worst day of her life, too, because here she is watching her husband. She's just losing her husband. My wife was an attorney then.
Yeah.
And she, you know, a woman of some capability and power and influence in the world, and to watch your husband just gradually die in front of your eyes and nobody cares, I said to my wife, it's time for us to say goodbye. she got up from the chair, which was next to the bed, and she put her arms around me and kissed me and held me. And we told each other how much we loved each other. And every time I go down this road, it makes me sad, but, you know, to say goodbye, I mean, and we knew it was forever. And I knew that when you die, I mean, I knew this absolutely positively. When you die, that's it. There is nothing else. This is what I knew. You're a biochemical organism made up of 75 trillion cells or whatever, and when the organism ceases to function, the biochemical, you know, functions begin to fail, and you lose consciousness, and then you're dead, and then your body rots, and that's all there is. And anything that would be left of you would be like maybe your kids or something would remember you for a generation, or maybe if you made something like a bridge or some artwork, you'd be remembered for a little while. But that was it. I mean, I knew that, absolutely. And everybody I knew that. You know, this was a certainty. So when we said goodbye, I was saying goodbye to oblivion. And eventually, she was crying so hard she sat back down, and I closed my eyes and went into unconsciousness.
And you, before you went into unconsciousness, you felt a bit of relief, too, that you could escape this horrible pain, and was there a feeling of sort of calm about it as well to you?
Yeah, I wanted to die because there was, since they said there wasn't going to be a doctor until the next day, and I had felt for many hours like I was dying. And medically, I had good reason to feel that way because I really was dying. And the pain, which had gone from a pain that, I mean, I was a big, strong guy, 38 years old, had played football in high school and stuff like that. This pain threw me down to the ground, kicking and screaming and yelling. And from that point on, it just went worse and worse and worse and worse. I was ready to be out, you know. I was ready to be gone because I can't do this anymore. You know, you can do it for 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, but I was at the point of like close to 10 hours, and I'd had it. So I was ready to go. And so here, you know, people ask me all the time, were you dead? Well, it's an impossible question to answer because I had no medical attention. No one ever took my temperature. Nobody ever put the blood pressure cuff on me or anything. So nobody was examining me. But the fact of the matter was, it's a ridiculous argument. I was dying. As much as anybody can be dying in that state.
So you go into unconsciousness, and then what?
The
shock of your life.
To my complete surprise, I was standing next to the bed that I had been lying in, and there's my wife, and I'm standing up, and I know the situation. I'm completely clear about my problem, and I know I have to have surgery, and that I'm sick, and I have a perforated duodenum and all that stuff. But I feel pretty good. Matter of fact, parts of me feel quite good, better than they've ever felt in my life, really alive. And I try to communicate with my wife, who it appeared to me was ignoring me.
You were next to her? You were
I was on the other side of the bed from her.
Okay.
And I thought she was pretending that she could neither hear me nor see me. Of course, in fact, she couldn't hear me or see me. And then I realized that the bed that I had been in was occupied with a thing. And as I examined the thing, which was covered up to the neck with a sheet, and bent over and looked at the face, which was turned away from me, turned towards my wife, I realized that it looked remarkably like me. Now, this was all very confusing because how did somebody get in my bed who looked like me? Because it wasn't me, because I was alive. And I knew that the thing in the bed was an inanimate object. I knew that about it. And so, you know, part of me was like, that's me, but how could it be me? Because this is impossible.
Because here I am.
Yeah, and so I couldn't figure this out. So I turned to my roommate, who was a 68-year-old, very kind Frenchman by the name of M. Florent, and I yelled and screamed in his face to find an answer to this problem. And he looked through me without blinking or any response at all, just as if I wasn't screaming in his face. Now, I didn't know why my wife would ignore me, but I couldn't figure out why Monsieur Florent would ignore me. I mean, and so I heard people outside the room calling me by name. And so I went over to the doorway of the room, and I said, are you from the doctor? I'm really sick. I have to have surgery. You know, I've been waiting a long time. I'm really in bad shape. And they said things like, we've been waiting for you a long time. It's time for you to go. hurry up, we can't wait any longer, we know all about you, let's go, things like that. So I thought that meant, yes, they were from the doctor to take me to surgery.
And they spoke English, and nobody else was speaking English, did
Yeah,
you?
I thought that was very weird, because everybody else in the hospital spoke with a very thick French accent
Right.
or no English at all. But these people were, well, and also I thought, they want me to walk to surgery? You know, but after what I'd experienced in this hospital, okay, it's,
Hey.
you know, it's the way they do things here. So I left the room, and when I left the room, I had a really bad feeling about leaving the room, because the room was bright and clear and light. The room was very bright. There was a lot of light in the room. And the hallway was hazy. It wasn't dark. It was just foggy and hazy and dim and very unclear. But I went with these people, and I had a strong sense that I was leaving that room forever. And we continued on a journey that was ridiculously long.
What were they saying to you? They were saying, just come closer, and you kept following? Or what were they saying to you as you were
They were
following
very insistent, hurry up, we've got to go. You know, we've waited for you so long. You know, we've got to take you there. They were very insistent and very clear about what they want to do, and there was about a dozen of them, and they were around
What did they
me.
look like? Were they close to you?
Men and
or?
women, very, very pale. Everything was gray. The clothing was totally plain and gray. Almost could have been like hospital scrubs, only pale gray. They were all adults, men and women, and they were very pale. And I mean, they weren't particularly scary at this point.
Right.
And as we went along, they became crueler and more insistent. And
When you say crueler, what
let's
were
go, come on, you're slowing down, keep going, keep moving.
And they made fun of you, too.
Yeah, and they started ridiculing me and things like that. And I started to get really scared, but where was I to go? We were in this endless space, moving along, and I didn't know where we were going, and I'm beginning to realize that this is not going to work out good. This isn't the hospital. They aren't from a doctor. I mean, I'm beginning, this is all dawning on me that this is, something's going very wrong here, but there's nothing for me to do. So finally, we're in real darkness now, and I said to him, I'm not going any further, which was a bluff because I had no sense of orientation which way to go. And they said, well, you're almost there, and they started to push and pull at me, and I tried to defend myself. And although I just had the worst day of my life and had been dying, I felt very strong. I wasn't the least bit tired. But the fight was, the sensations of the fight were just like if it had happened in this world. You know, when I hit them, I felt it. When they harmed me, I felt it. But they had no sensation. No matter what I did to them, it had no effect on them.
And the whole time they were hitting you, and I know earlier they were heckling and saying, oh, he hears us. They were making fun of you because your gown didn't cover your entire body and making fun of that. And at this point, what were they saying to you? They were screaming obscenities at you? Or?
Yeah, and laughing a lot. There was a lot of laughter. And, you know, it's really hard for me to talk about this, but, you know, it's like he really hates this, as someone was gouging me in the eye or other things. And their purpose was entirely to humiliate me, not to destroy me, but to humiliate me in the biting and scratching and, you know, violating me in all kinds of ways. And
you wrote in the book that when they actually came in physical contact with you, even though you had seen what appeared to be clothing on them, you didn't feel any clothing at that point.
Right.
And that they were like humans, but they had what? Describe what
well,
they looked like.
their nails seemed very harsh and sharp, and a lot of them were biting me, and I've not been bit a lot in my life, but they seemed to have exceptionally sharp, jagged teeth as they were biting and gnawing on me.
They're just ripping your flesh from your body, ripping it apart?
Well, if they'd really wanted to do that, they could have had done with me in a few minutes.
Right.
No, they wanted to torment me, and so what they were doing was really simple. They were trying to inflict pain. And it was clear to me that these people had no, what we would think of as compassion, no love, no human sensation of their own. So what they were doing was they were feeding off my pain, if that makes any sense, that gave them
Pleasure.
it gave them some kind of pleasure to get as much pain out of me as possible. And so they were trying to prolong that as much as possible.
How would you describe that kind of pain? You went through excruciating pain in the hospital, obviously. Yeah. Was it 10 times worse than that, or?
It was much worse physically, but what hurt more about it was them doing it to me. You know, as a human being and as a man, and they did a lot of unspeakable things to me,
sure.
which are just. How could someone do this to you? That's what hurt more. Their utter lack of any interest in me other than to hurt me is what really hurt, more than the physical pain. And this just went on and on and on and on and on. I don't ever think about it, because if I even get close to it, I get really upset. So, and there are certain things in the world that I don't like because they remind me of it. And
because you wrote that it actually traumatizes you when you think about.
Yeah, and like I can't go to a bar and stuff because the noise in there and stuff. It's too. It's not the same, but it's just a little bit of comparison between the kind of frivolity of a bunch of drunks in a bar, you know, to what I experienced there. I don't like really loud music because of it. But anyhow, so I was lying in that place, all torn up, broken up, beat up, but more importantly, emotionally destroyed. And people were kicking me, and I couldn't respond anymore. I couldn't even moan or groan or anything. I was lying in a fetal position, just sort of trying to protect myself, all ripped up, and people were kicking me, and they were expressing their disappointment that I didn't have any more response to what they were doing. And I heard, strangely, my voice, although I distinctly did not say it, pray to God. And I thought to myself, being an atheist, like, what a dumb idea. I don't believe in God. And the second time, pray to God. And I thought, I haven't prayed, you know, in my adult life. I had stopped praying when I was like 15 or something. And I'm 38 now, so I had no remembrance of prayer. And I thought, I wouldn't even know how to pray if I wanted to pray. And then a third time, said pray to God, and I was thinking, what did I say when I was a kid? I was not intending to pray. I was just sort of curious if there was a prayer somewhere in my memory. And I was trying to remember things, and it all got mixed up with the Pledge of Allegiance and the National Anthem. It just became this big confused mess with the 23rd Psalm and the Our Father and things like that. And it was all these little phrases mixed up here and there in my mind. And really wanted to grasp at some of this stuff. I wanted to recall this. And I accidentally muttered a couple phrases, and the people around me could not bear to have the mention of God. And they told me so in the most filthy, horrible language that they wanted me to stop, to not talk about God, and now they were going to really hurt me if I didn't stop. But because it was so repulsive to them and literally pushing them into the darkness, it encouraged me to try and... So I was just trying to think of phrases from these memories, and they're screaming and yelling at me to stop, and I'm trying to remember these things, and eventually I'm all alone in that place. And it's hard for people to understand, but I was left alone in that darkness, in my gore and in my pain, forever and ever and ever. And it's impossible to talk about. But that was the real hell.
Because you knew. And you wrote in your book that you were in the sewer of the universe.
Yeah, and I knew that I was going to be there forever. You know, and it was so bad being alone in that place that it was even like, well, maybe some of them will come back. You know, not all of them, but maybe, I mean, anything but just to be here. And as I looked over my life, I thought about what a failure I had been in terms of I had not been a good husband, I had not been a good father, I had not been a good teacher. Because the reason why I wasn't because I was always obsessed with what's in it for me. I was not the great artist that I'd hoped to be. I was just a mediocre artist, at a mediocre university. Everything looked so bleak, and I was thinking, why was I ever born to end up in this place of horror and torment, and now just abject hopelessness and loneliness? I knew that I belonged there. There was absolutely no sense that they got the wrong guy, or I'm innocent, I knew that the people that had attacked me earlier had been people like me. I'm not proud of this, I'm really ashamed of this, but there was a spiritual affinity between them and me. They were like soulmates, if you will. And that my only hope in this place was to somehow become one of them and no longer be their victim. But I didn't want to do that either, because I hated them and I hated what they stood for, and I hated their darkness and their cruelty and all that. And so the situation seemed to be so completely hopeless. I knew that I was never going to see my wife again. I was never going to see the world again. I didn't know where I was, but I knew that I was in the garbage heap. I was in the cesspool. And I knew that when you die, your consciousness and who you are keeps going. Mm-hmm. And it was going to go on forever. I knew that I could never be extinguished. And
what were you thinking about God at that point?
I got the strangest, vivid memory in my mind of myself as a child, maybe like 8 years old, sitting in a Sunday school classroom, and we were singing Jesus Loves Me. And not only did I get the memory of myself as a child doing this, but I could also feel what I had felt as a sweet, innocent child. Just as simple as possible, that there was a goodness in the universe, unknowable goodness, much greater and bigger than anything that we could understand out there. And its name was Jesus, and that this goodness really cared about me, really loved me. I mean, not generically, but specifically cared about me, this really great, wonderful, I hate to call him a man, but this personage, Jesus, who was unlike any human being in his greatness and his power and his goodness.
So this inspiration was being given to you at this point then?
Okay. And it was a very powerful memory. Well, you can imagine, as deep in despair as I was, this was like, and this would be like giving the Hope Diamond to a pauper on the street. I mean, this is like, I'm going to go for this, because this is like the first ray of hope I've seen in this whole scenario.
And you didn't think in some way you were hallucinating, this was a bad dream, it was all going to end. You just knew this was real.
This was far more real than any experience of reality I've ever had in my life. People can understand, this world is a dream compared to the afterlife. Now people think, well, all I know is this, so the afterlife must be dreamlike. They're completely wrong. This is the dream. Your sensations are fewer in this world. Your feelings and knowledge and abilities are much fewer in this world than they will be in the next world. Whether you're going up or down, you're going to have a much new sense of what it means to be who you are. And I called out in that darkness, not knowing if Jesus was real, but simply hoping, based on that childhood faith, that that he would be real. But I didn't, so I said, "Jesus, please save me." And with that, a tiny pinpoint of light appeared in that darkness, and very rapidly got brighter and brighter. And then this huge, impossibly bright, white, warm light was over me. And I felt hands in this light picking me up into it, and also because I was now in light for the first time, I saw how horrible I was, and I looked like...
You weren't scared, though?
No. I was amazed and in awe, but not afraid, because it was just so beautiful and like wonderful. And it was a little bit scary, but it was like just so great, and as he touched me and picked me up, all that gore, all that horror that was me, all went away, and I was made whole physically, but more importantly, all the pain inside of me was filled with ecstasy. And the ecstasy, quite simply, was the incredibly powerful sense of love that he was sharing me, that his love for me. And I knew several things immediately, one, that this was indeed who I'd called out to. This was Jesus. This was a person of great power. This was a person of unbelievable goodness, just pure, perfect goodness. I don't know how I knew it, but I knew he was really smart and that I knew nothing compared to what he knew. I knew that he knew everything about me, even everything I'd ever forgotten, he knew. I knew that he knew me more intimately than I knew me.
How'd that make you feel, though? You knew some
worried.
bad thing, yeah.
I was worried about that. But it was all good because he loved me so much, and I can't begin to describe. You know, I wish that there was some way that I could manufacture or create some kind of substitute experience for people and how much God loves them, how much Jesus loves them, because it would totally change their lives. And they can have that experience, but I can't do it for them.
Right.
They have to do it for themselves.
What did he look like? How can you describe him, if you
Well,
can?
at this time, he was just bright, white light, and all I could do was feel him. And he held me against him, and he embraced me, hugged me, and stroked my back like a mother would a lost child, you know, sort of there, and comfort me. And I did the only reasonable thing. I cried like a baby and slobbered on it. I was like really embarrassed because I was slobbering on it because I was crying so hard. And he was rubbing my back and holding me, and then we began to go out of that place. We just went straight up and away from there.
And was he alone? Were there angels around him?
At this point, it was just he and I, and as we moved towards more light and more points of light, I became aware that all those points of light weren't things, that they were people like him, which I like to refer to as angels or saints, whatever. And they were all moving, and way off in the distance was a great center of light, and we were moving towards that, and I all of a sudden felt terribly ashamed because I felt like I was such a piece of garbage, and this was so holy and good, and I thought to myself, he's made an awful mistake, and I don't belong here. And so we stopped at that point, and he said to me, we don't make mistakes, and you do belong here. And I was quite taken aback because he hadn't spoken to me up until this time, and he was speaking directly into my mind. And I could hear his voice, but it wasn't coming through my ear. And I also caught on that he was also hearing what I was thinking, which was a little more disconcerting. And then he said, after we exchanged some conversation this way, telepathically, he said that he had some people he wanted me to meet. And he called out with musical tones, and some of these angels came and we're all in space now. We're not in heaven and we're not in hell. We're just in between. And they came and we made more talk, and they said that they wanted to show me my life. And interestingly, they had a complete record of my life, these angels. They had recorded every minute of my life, including my thoughts, my feelings, including the feelings and thoughts of the people that I'd interacted with, including even things that had happened to the people that I interacted with that I wasn't aware of, like the bad day my dad had at the office and came home and he and I had a fight. When I got to see what he went through.
You saw everything or just bits and pieces?
Episodes.
Episodes.
Yeah, I didn't see my entire life. We just went through episodes starting in a chronological order. And
how did you see it? Was it you saw it in your mind? There was actually like
no,
a
it was
panel
real
of it?
strange. It was like watching a play on a stage, and there were just actors, and there were hardly any sets. So if it was like my mother and I talking, and my mother drinking coffee at the kitchen table, it was like the table and my mom and her, maybe a little bit of the linoleum, but the counters weren't there.
Right.
Because what they were showing me, that all that really mattered was how I had interacted with people, whether I had been a compassionate person or not. That's all they were interested in. We would get up to points in my life where I would, you know, have an accomplishment, like win an 8 high school shot put meet or something, which was my big event in high school, was shot put. And they'd skip over it. I said, wait a minute, I wanted a shot put there. I worked really hard to get to that point, you know. And I said, well, that's not important. What's really important is this. And they'd show me how I'd shown a little kindness to a really fat, uncoordinated kid who didn't know how to throw, and I was trying to teach him how to throw the shot. And I was like, they're going like, see, that's good stuff, you know?
So they showed you the good things, and when you looked at good things, it made them happy, and then when you saw the bad things, they became very sad?
Yeah, and extremely disappointed. I knew, fortunately, that they loved me, no matter what I did, but I knew that I majorly was letting them down, and that they very much disapproved of what they were seeing. But it was like, you know, we had such greater hopes for you than this.
And what was Jesus saying or doing at this point?
Holding me, loving me, and sharing his feelings about what we were watching in my life with me. And as we saw the bad things become more prevalent and the good things less prevalent as I matured, I felt very, very ashamed. And I didn't want him to see it, even though I knew, you know, I mean, it's ridiculous because he knows all this stuff, but I was like, I wanted to, you know, hide it from him. You know, don't watch this stuff, you know.
Was he angry with you, or was he just disappointed?
Not angry. Very, very disappointed.
Like a parent would be with a child.
Yeah, because he had really big hopes for it. Because he really, I mean, it's a weird thing to say, but when you're in with Jesus, it's like you're the most special person in the whole universe. That's the way he makes you feel. You know what I mean? He just makes you feel that you're just the most neatest, wonderful thing, and all of his attention and everything in the universe has been about making you a beautiful child of God. And with all the hope for the potential that could be. And I flunked. I flunked the very reason why I was put into this world, which is, one way of stating it is, as Jesus did, which is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That nice summary of what we're here to do, to love one another. And I had loved me. I made myself a God.
Had you loved yourself over your wife, over your children? I'm sure you loved your family.
Yeah,
because most people say, but look, I'm working hard for my family. I'm doing the best I can. I love them, but I've got to do this, and I've got to do this, and that's why I've got to be away from them, and that's why I've got to try to strive to become number one, because they're going to benefit. I mean, that's the argument a lot of people make.
Absolutely, and you know, this hurts me to say, but yeah, I loved myself a whole lot more than I loved them. But it was the rationale, as you said, was, hey, you know, what's good for me is good for them ultimately, right? You know.
Right. So
I neglected them and emotionally cheated on them. You know, we don't want to go into that too far.
Well, so you saw this view, and up to what point did they take you? Up until your marriage, until your
Oh no, up
death?
to the present. It was quite bleak, and I was so happy when it was over, because having been a teacher, I realized that I had. Not only had I not passed the course, I had flunked the course. You
know, you're not Catholic, but a lot of Catholics would look at that and say, well, that's kind of like the purgatory we're taught about.
Yeah.
So it would be sort of like a purgatory.
Yeah, and I heard a priest explain purgatory this way, which I think is really wonderful. He said, don't think of purgatory, this is a priest speaking, I'm quoting him, don't think of purgatory as a geographical place. Think of it as a state of being. And I certainly believe that we need to be purged or purified before we can go to heaven.
Even after our death, even though we've accepted Jesus, even if you've accepted Jesus as your Savior.
Absolutely, because none of us are perfect enough, pure enough to go to heaven. I mean, Mother Teresa would be the first one to tell you that she's, you know, she needs more perfection, filled with the goodness of Christ, and let go of whatever those little things that she might have been holding on to, you know, in her life. So I thank God for that purgation, or that purgatory, or whatever. But I don't want to think of it as like a country that we have to sort of make the journey through. Think of it as a process that's a wonderful grace of God that we're given, that we are made perfect by God so that we can go to heaven. And nobody is good enough to go to heaven without the love and the perfection of God interceding on our behalf.
So what happened next? So after you see this view of your life, then what?
Well, they said, do you have any questions? And I said, oh, I've got a million questions. And they said, well, ask whatever you want. And they were the most wonderful teachers, because they were trying to speak directly to my level of understanding, which was pathetically low in comparison to them. And I had, you know, like no theological or religious background or understanding at that point, so I didn't even know what it's good stuff to ask. But so I asked all kinds of questions, historical questions, biblical questions. And everything I asked, they answered. A lot of times they showed me things. There were times when it was like we were there.
Right.
I would say, what would the future be like, and would be in the future? What was this like, and would be there? And it was very important experience, because people ask me, how long did this last? And I said, well, I learned a whole lot more than I ever learned in graduate school, which was 3 years. And this was a much more intense and thorough course. So I learned way more in this question and answer period, however long it took, which I don't know, than I'd learned going to the University of California, Berkeley.
Well, let's go through some of those questions.
Okay.
I don't know if we can tackle all of them, but let's go through some of them. What are some of the most important ones that you felt like you asked? I know you ask about, let's say, for example, you ask about Jesus in the Bible. You said, is that all that Jesus did? You know?
Right. And they said that, it was funny because this is in the Bible. I didn't know it at the time, but they said that if they'd written down all the things that Jesus did, it would fill all the books in the world. The world couldn't even hold all the books about what Jesus did when he was in this world. And, you know, Jesus is alive today. Jesus has been around from the beginning and is still around. And the reason why Christianity exists, and the only reason why it exists, is because millions of people have experienced his love, his presence, his power. They've experienced him in some way in their lives. And there are millions and millions of people, and there have been for over 2,000 years, that know that he is real, you know, and that he is what God has sent to us so that we can have a proper relationship with God.
And they told you that what's contained that he did much more, but what's contained within the pages of the Bible is all that we need to know to do what we're supposed to do on earth to get to heaven, to be with him.
You know, those four little Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, seem so little, but when you try and preach them every Sunday, there's so much there that there's more than a lifetime's worth of learning and preaching and understanding. In what we know more than enough about Jesus to know that we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. You talked also about how we got here and when God began and when he began, or was he always there? Talk about that for us.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting, I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're asking, but that the creation didn't happen once a long time ago, and like, you know, that old idea that the clockmaker made the clock and then wound it up, and it's been sort of like ticking ever since.
Yeah.
That God has been doing the creation and is doing the creation, and that we are invited to be a part of this. We have this, one of the terms for God is the creator, and it says we're made in the image and likeness of God, and we're invited to participate in the creation. And in this life, one of the ways that we do this, an obvious way, is to have children and to raise them. I mean, what more creative act could you possibly want, and what a more awesome responsibility than to have children and be responsible for their nurture and education and well-being.
And you wrote that he is a part of each and every one of us, and that he takes great joy in seeing each and every human being. But that seems so mind-boggling given the tremendous population on our earth, that he's actually able...
But the irony is that for God it's so easy. You know, for God's conscious, see, because we can only project our sense of consciousness onto God and anthropomorphize God, but God's consciousness permeates everything. And one of the terms that we use for this is the Holy Spirit, that Spirit of God in the ways that God has revealed God's self to us. That Spirit is everywhere and through everything. You know, God is with the creation, and God is present to us. And we can either be aware of that and act accordingly, or we can be oblivious to it and deny that.
If you had not been sent back to earth, where might you have gone after you had left the angels and Jesus? What would you have gone to heaven at that point because you had been purged, or would you have had to go to another point where you'd have to learn something else before to reach a higher level, then another higher level?
I don't honestly know the answer, so I can only speculate, but I wasn't ready to go to heaven. I mean, they made it really clear to me that I was not a candidate at that point.
Were you shown where other people were going? I think you wrote about maybe somebody by a brook reading a famous novel of some sort.
Yeah, there are places where I could have gone and matured spiritually in God's whole creation, but I have no I can't comprehend it all. It's way too beyond my understanding.
But you saw that? They gave
Yeah.
you a vision of that?
Yeah.
So will people...
God, see, the thing that people don't realize is that we constrain God and make God so small after our image. But God's love for us is without limit and so vast that God will do exactly the right thing for that individual, which he knows, God knows intimately, what they need to develop in their spiritual journey.
And you wrote that heaven is nothing like the image we have of heaven here on earth.
No, and I don't understand, because it's really sad. Heaven is the center of all the creative activity of the universe. And of course, what's in the midst of heaven would be God, which is the source of everything that is. God is the source of not just life, but light, energy, space, time. There is nothing that isn't from God. And so to go into the unlimited variety of heaven and experience of heaven is the greatest joy in the whole universe. Every awake spiritual being in the universe wants to go to heaven and be with God. And the only beings that don't want to do that are beings that are tremendously deceived. And so when I use the word awake, anyone that wakes up realizes that heaven is the next step. That's what you want to go to, and you want to live a life that would qualify you to be there.
Bonjour, aujourd'hui je vais vous parler d'un autre livre sur les expériences aux frontières de la mort, Voir, Paris et mourir du professeur Howard Storm, avec une préface de Anne Ritchie. Alors Anne Ritchie que vous connaissez, enfin certains d'entre vous connaissent, c'est une romancière américaine, spécialiste de fantasy, etc. Et on lui doit notamment un livre qui s'appelle Interview avec un vampire, me semble-t-il. Alors, Voir, Paris et mourir est un livre intéressant à plusieurs égards, parce que c'est une expérience aux frontières de la mort peu commune. Alors, rappelons juste pour le principe ce qu'est une expérience aux frontières de la mort. Ça a été redécouvert par le professeur Raymond Moody dans les années 70 et popularisé ensuite par les différents ouvrages de médecins, le docteur Morse, entre autres sur les expériences aux frontières de la mort infantile, qui ont montré que les expériences aux frontières de la mort n'avaient strictement rien à voir avec les médicaments, kétamine, Valium, qu'on donnait aux patients. Voilà. Donc depuis ces recherches, parce que maintenant ça c'était dans les années 80, donc on a 30 ans de témoignages d'expériences aux frontières de la mort. Mais là où le témoignage du professeur Storm est unique, c'est parce que il décrit justement son passage dans ce qu'on appelle enfer, avant de remonter au paradis. C'est quelque chose auquel j'ai été d'ailleurs confronté à l'époque où je travaillais sur les livres Enquête sur l'existence des anges gardiens, parce qu'on voyait bien que tous ceux qui avaient une expérience frontière de la mort se considéraient un petit peu comme des élus, alors qu'en fait, véritablement, ce sont des redoublants, il faut quand même le rappeler.
C'était comme si le bruit me poussait, et finalement, je suis sorti par le haut de ma tête.
Quand j'ai comparé la description qu'a fait Pam de ce qu'elle a entendu pendant l'intervention avec le rapport d'opération, j'ai découvert que ce dialogue avait effectivement eu lieu. L'autre point intéressant, c'est que ce dialogue a eu lieu au moment où Pam dit avoir fait cette expérience de sortie du corps.
Je ne suis pas restée là très longtemps. J'ai soudain senti une présence, et quand je me suis retournée, j'ai vu un minuscule point lumineux. Il semblait très très éloigné. Et quand je m'en suis approchée, j'ai entendu ma grand-mère m'appeler. Je suis aussitôt allée vers elle et elle m'a gardé tout près d'elle. Et plus je me rapprochais de la lumière, plus je commençais à voir des gens que je reconnaissais.
Il vous explique que de l'autre côté, c'est absolument fabuleux et qu'il n'y a pas d'expérience négative. Désolé pour eux, mais nous, en tout cas moi, en tant que journaliste, j'en ai trouvé au moins deux, que d'ailleurs nous avons publiés au Jardin des Livres. Et nous allons examiner justement celle du professeur Storm, qui décrit d'abord une expérience négative avant qu'elle ne devienne positive. Hein, donc elle est tout à fait unique. Alors, qui est le professeur Storm? Storm est un professeur d'université américain, comme il y en a des milliers, qui gagnait très bien sa vie, et qui enseignait donc l'art, l'histoire de l'art. Et il était en déplacement à Paris, hein, il n'y a pas très longtemps, dans les années 80, avec tous ses élèves, lorsque, un ou deux jours avant le retour aux États-Unis, des douleurs lancinantes se déclarent au niveau de son estomac, et il est obligé d'aller consulter à l'hôpital. En l'occurrence, là, c'est l'hôpital Cochin. Alors, les 35 heures aidant, hein, on est au début des 35 heures ou je ne sais quoi, en plus c'est le week-end, tout le monde est parti, donc il attend avec je crois que c'est son épouse, que quelqu'un veuille bien, ou l'un de ses élèves, qu'un médecin vienne l'examiner, et tant et si bien qu'il finit par s'écrouler dans la salle d'attente. Boum. Donc voilà, c'est une expérience aux frontières de la mort à Paris. Hein, vous voyez comme quoi les expériences aux frontières de la mort n'ont pas toutes lieu aux États-Unis. Hein. Mais seuls les Américains, on dirait, osent en parler. Hein, je le rappelle. Hein, c'est très important. Donc le professeur Storm se sent aspiré, il se voit de l'extérieur, mais en même temps la réalité dans laquelle il se trouve est plus réelle que celle dans laquelle nous vivons, nous et vous. Et il découvre des présences qui lui disent « viens, suis-moi, suis-nous », etc. Il ne sait pas trop pourquoi, mais il les suit parce qu'il n'est pas à l'aise, il ne sait pas ce qui se passe. Et il est emporté progressivement dans une zone extraordinairement sombre où ces présences, au fur et à mesure qu'ils descendent, deviennent extrêmement violentes, cruelles. Alors, il décrit des choses absolument inimaginables et même ignobles dans ce livre. Il m'a dit au téléphone qu'il n'a pas tout raconté. Bah, c'est dommage pour nous, parce qu'il n'a pas eu le courage ou les mots, hein, parce que s'il se remettait, sinon il l'aurait revécu. Hein. Il vit absolument l'épouvante totale, l'horreur totale dans ce qu'on peut appeler l'enfer. Hein. C'est un côté un peu de Dante, hein, Divine Comédie, mais c'est fouilleusement moderne. Hein. C'est ni l'un ni l'autre, c'est son expérience à lui, qui n'est pas similaire à d'autres qu'on a déjà entendus. Et à un moment donné, il se rappelle, parce qu'il n'en peut plus, mais je veux dire, pendant combien de temps ce cauchemar va-t-il continuer? Et donc à un moment donné, il se rappelle comme ça une prière qu'il faisait dans son enfance, hein, une prière je vais pas dire de catéchisme, mais un peu dans ce genre-là. Et donc, il est athée, hein, je précise qu'il est athée, donc en tant que professeur athée, vous savez, l'enfer n'existe pas, le diable n'existe pas, les anges n'existent pas, Dieu n'existe pas, etc. etc., etc. Hein, rien n'existe, à part cette réalité-ci. Après son expérience, après sa mort à l'hôpital Cochin, il découvre que si, justement, qu'une autre réalité existe, et que celle-ci, elle n'est pas toute rose, hein, elle est même épouvantablement noire et cruelle. Et donc il y a cette prière d'enfance qui commence à lui remonter, et il la récite, et il se rend compte que plus il récite ses prières, et plus cela éloigne les personnages maléfiques, ces démons, ces gnomes, c'est tout ce que vous voulez, qui n'arrivent plus à lui faire du mal. C'est-à-dire qu'il réussit à les tenir à l'écart. Hein, voilà. Et donc là, il réalise qu'il a entre ses mains un outil, hein, la parole, hein, ou la pensée, et donc il continue, il fait des efforts pour se rappeler ses prières. Je résume le livre, hein, parce qu'on ne va pas tout raconter non plus, ça va de soi, mais c'est très intéressant. Son ange gardien vient le chercher et l'emmène de l'autre côté, c'est-à-dire que là on passe, c'est très, je ne vais pas dire que c'est très manichéen comme expérience, mais il y a quand même un peu de ça. Alors, pour vous résumer, les anges et son ange gardien montrent au professeur Storm l'avenir de son pays, etc. On est dans les années 80, on est encore le mur de Berlin est encore debout. Les anges lui expliquent que de toute manière, Dieu va faire tomber, hein, le mur de Berlin, et qu'il y aurait aussi une crise économique majeure aux États-Unis qui fera tomber l'Amérique, et nous repartirons sur des bases un petit peu nouvelles, enfin même quasiment véritablement nouvelles. Et Je rappelle que ce livre a été publié quand même il y a quelques années, donc bien avant la crise économique américaine de 2007. Hein, donc on voit bien que quelque chose qui a été écrit s'est réalisé, alors que ni l'un ni l'autre ne pouvait savoir ce qui allait se passer dans les années 88-89, lorsque tout le bloc de l'Est s'est effondré. Ce qui est intéressant, à nouveau, avec ce livre, Voir Paris mourir, avec le professeur Storm, c'est que Storm a rencontré le Christ, et que cette rencontre a été tellement puissante pour lui, qu'à son retour dans son corps, par définition, parce qu'il a écrit ce livre après, donc ça veut dire qu'il n'est pas mort tout de suite, eh bien, il a abandonné son poste, dans lequel il était extrêmement bien rémunéré, à l'université, pour devenir un banal pasteur. Et aujourd'hui, il parcourt tous les États-Unis et il raconte à qui veut l'entendre son expérience aux frontières de la mort à Paris. Alors, j'étais très surpris de voir qu'en fait, il n'y avait quasiment pas de traduction de ce livre, c'est typiquement américano-américain. Et c'est pour ça que donc au Jardin des Livres, on a pris la décision de le traduire. Et j'ai discuté avec le professeur Storm, il m'a dit au téléphone à l'époque que son expérience était aussi vivante au moment où je lui parlais, qu'il l'avait vécu, alors que ça remonte maintenant à des années, et que l'avenir nous réserve des surprises absolument extraordinaires au terme de cette crise économique. Donc vous voyez, et je précise à nouveau qu'il ne pouvait pas savoir qu'une crise économique majeure allait détruire les États-Unis. C'est ce qu'il dit, c'est ce qu'il a vu. Voilà. Donc, si vous voulez vous familiariser avec cette autre dimension qui nous attend tous, parce qu'on va tous mourir un jour ou l'autre, voilà. Mieux vaut tard que jamais, comme on dit, mais bon, il n'y a pas de loi qui écrit que vous allez mourir dans votre lit ou que vous allez mourir à 93 ans, dans une maison de retraite. On peut mourir à n'importe quel moment, voilà, il suffit de regarder les infos, il ne vous parle que de ça. Justement, il ne vous parle que de ça pour vous montrer que Dieu n'existe pas. C'est intéressant. Alors que ce livre-ci, justement, c'est une gifle monumentale à l'ensemble de cette presse qui, quand elle n'a rien à se mettre sous la dent, vous dit, alors qu'on est en France, vous dit qu'un bus est sorti de la route à La Paz, en Bolivie, ou je ne sais pas où, et qu'il y a eu 80 morts. On s'en fout, je suis désolé pour le dire. Mais se garde bien de parler d'ouvrages comme celui-ci. Il y a une autre dimension, le professeur Storm le montre bien, et surtout ses actes, les actes du professeur Storm montrent que ce qu'il a vécu, il est en phase avec. C'est-à-dire qu'il a démissionné de son poste et il est devenu pasteur. Il est pasteur dans une petite église, je ne sais plus dans quelle ville. Vous pouvez le voir, vous pouvez le rencontrer aux États-Unis pour lui en parler si vous le souhaitez. Et je ne peux que vous encourager véritablement à lire, parce que c'est une expérience aux frontières de la mort extraordinairement moderne, contemporaine, qui s'est passée à Paris, et qu'il a eu le courage de raconter. D'ailleurs, il montre bien qu'il voyait sa personnalité en tant que professeur, et il se voyait surtout au niveau, vous savez, au moment des parties, les parties comme on dit, les parties. Les parties, c'est on commence à boire et puis on boit, et puis et une partie n'est réussie que si vous avez vomi tout ce que vous avez bu. Alors là, c'est les grandes parties, c'est absolument formidable. On est quand même assez proche des orgies romaines d'une certaine façon. Voilà. Et il se voyait, et il percevait sa personnalité qui, en fait, niait l'existence même de cette autre dimension. Je ne parle pas de nier l'existence de Dieu ou des anges, je veux simplement nier sa partie spirituelle. C'est-à-dire que plus on est athée, et en fait plus on veut nier la part spirituelle de notre être. C'est ça qui est intéressant. Et je rappelle qu'il y a quand même quelques philosophes qui sont morts, alors qu'ils ont passé leur vie à dire que Dieu n'existait pas, ou que s'il existe, il avait pris sa retraite. Ils ont quand même récité leur rosaire au moment de mourir. Comme quoi, juste quelques heures ou quelques jours avant de mourir, la partie spirituelle revient en force. Voilà. Donc là c'est vraiment un témoignage unique, et je vous le recommande chaudement, le livre du professeur Storm, Voir Paris et mourir. Merci à vous.